Hey guys, tonight we were going to stand on the edge of the abyss. Imagine it. The air is thick with dust and the metallic tang of fear. The sun beats down, or maybe the moon casts long, skeletal shadows. The sound is a low hum at first, the murmur of an approaching army, the whisper of a final prayer. Your back is against a wall, a rock, a pillar. There are no more roads to take, no escape routes left to chart. All you have is the ground beneath your feet, the weapon in your hand, and the pounding in your chest that feels like a war drum counting down your final seconds. This is the last stand. It's the moment where everything you are is distilled into one final, defiant act. And let's be honest, in most of these situations, you and I would probably be the first ones to trip over a rock and get captured. No shame in that. Survival is a very respectable instinct. But tonight, we're not talking about us. We're talking about the ones who didn't run. The ones who, for reasons of faith, love, or sheer stubborn grit, planted their feet and became legends. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're all listening from tonight. Go ahead and drop your city or country and the local time in the comments. It's always so wonderful to see how this little community of ours spans the globe. All of us finding a quiet moment together under different skis. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our first story begins not with the roar of a battle, but with the quiet ache of an unanswered prayer. We find ourselves in the rolling hills of ancient Israel, in a time when the Bible says, quite plainly, that there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It's a recipe for chaos, a world without a center. And into this vacuum of leadership have poured the Philistines. Now, the Philistines weren't just some rival tribe from over the next hill. Think of them as the technologically advanced, militarily organized bullies of the neighborhood. They had iron chariots when the Israelites were still figuring out bronze. They had established cities, a federation of power, while Israel was a loose, squabbling confederation of tribes. For 40 years, the Philistines had their boot on Israel's neck. It wasn't just political domination. It was a deep cultural and spiritual humiliation. Imagine living your life knowing that at any moment, a Philistine patrol could come through, take your grain, insult your family, and mock your God, and there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. The spirit of the people was low, their faith was flickering, and hope was a currency scarcer than iron. It is in this heavy, oppressive atmosphere that we meet a man named Mano from the tribe of Dan. Dan was one of the tribes situated right on the frontier with the Philistines, meaning they bore the brunt of the oppression. Mano was likely a simple man, a farmer perhaps, living a life dictated by the seasons and the constant, simmering threat from his neighbors. But he had a private sorrow, a quiet grief that he shared with his wife. She was barren. In their culture, this was more than just a personal sadness. It was seen as a sign of disfavor, a public shame. A home without the laughter of children was a silent, empty place. Year after year, they must have prayed, hoped, and watched their hope fade with each passing month. Their personal emptiness mirrored the national emptiness of Israel, a nation without a future, without a deliverer. One sun-drenched afternoon, while Manoah's wife was out in the fields, perhaps gathering what little the Philistines had left behind, her world tilted on its axis. A figure appeared before her. This was no ordinary traveler. The text describes him as an angel of the Lord, and his presence was so radiant, so overwhelming, that she knew instantly she was in the presence of the divine. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. His message was direct, a thunderclap in the quiet of her grief. "You are barren and childless," he said, stating the obvious pain of her life. "But you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son." Can you even imagine the torrent of emotions? Shock, disbelief, a wild, surging hope she hadn't dared to feel in years. But the angel wasn't finished. This wouldn't be just any child. This child was to have a special destiny, a sacred purpose, and it came with a strict set of rules. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, the angel instructed. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Let's pause on that for a moment. A Nazirite. This was a special vow, a way for an ordinary person to dedicate themselves to God in an extraordinary way for a period of time. It involved three main things: no haircuts, no contact with anything dead, and no partaking of anything from the grapevine, no wine, no grapes, no raisins. It was a visible, public declaration that you were set apart for God. But this was different. This child's vow wasn't for a season, it was for life. His very existence was to be a statement. His long, uncut hair would be a living, growing symbol of his consecration. And his mission, to begin the deliverance. Not to finish it, but to be the divine spark, the explosive start to a revolution. The woman, overwhelmed and trembling, ran to find her husband. You can hear the breathless excitement in her words as she recounts the encounter. "A man of God came to me," she tells Manoah. "He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name." She was so stunned she forgot the basic journalistic questions. Who, what, where, when, why. All she knew was the promise. Manoah, bless his heart, is a bit more practical. He's overjoyed, but he's also a little panicked. This is a huge responsibility. A divinely ordained child with a pre-written destiny. There's no parenting manual for that. So he does the only thing he can think of. He prays, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again to teach us how to raise the boy who is to be born." It's a beautiful, humble prayer. It's the prayer of every parent who has ever felt overwhelmed. I don't know what I'm doing. Please help me. God hears his prayer. The angel appears again, this time to his wife once more as she's out in the field. She immediately runs to get Mano, and he comes face to face with the heavenly messenger. Mano asks for confirmation, double-checking the instructions, the way you would when you're assembling something incredibly important, and you're terrified of getting it wrong. The angel patiently repeats the rules. No wine, no unclean food, no razor. The mother's diet during pregnancy and nursing would sanctify the child even before he could make his own choices. His life was holy ground from the very beginning. Mano, filled with gratitude, offers the angel a meal. It's a gesture of hospitality, the ancient world's equivalent of saying, "Thank you, please, stay a while." But the angel gently refuses. "Even if I stay," he says, "I will not eat your food, but if you prepare a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." The angel is subtly reminding them who this is all about. It's not about him, it's about the God who sent him. Mano, still not fully grasping that he's talking to more than just a prophet, asks his name. "Why do you ask my name?" The angel replies, "It is beyond understanding." In Hebrew, the word is pili, which means wonderful. It's a hint, a divine riddle. He's essentially saying, you don't need my name. You need to focus on the wonder of what God is doing. So Mano takes a young goat and a grain offering and prepares a sacrifice on a rock. And as the flames leap up toward heaven, something incredible happens. The angel of the Lord ascends into the sky in the flame of the altar. In that fiery, glorious moment, Mano and his wife finally understand. They are not just in the presence of a messenger. They have been speaking with the divine. They fall on their faces, overcome with a mixture of terror and awe. The fear of the ancient world was that to see God was to die. "We are doomed to die," Mano cries to his wife. "We have seen God." But his wife, who seems to be the calmer and more insightful of the two throughout this whole story, offers a piece of gentle, unshakable logic. "If the Lord had intended to kill us," she says, "he would not have accepted a burnt offering from our hands, nor would he have shown us all these things or told us this." It's a profound statement of faith. God doesn't make promises just to break them. He doesn't show you a future just to snatch it away. Her heart rests in the goodness of the promise. And so the child is born. They name him Samson, which is related to the Hebrew word for sun. He is their little sunbeam, the light in their previously dark home. And as he grows, the Bible tells us, the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. What a wonderfully understated phrase. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. You can almost picture it. This isn't a child who just has a bit more energy than the others. This is a boy who probably accidentally pulls doors off their hinges. A teenager who, in a moment of playful wrestling with his friends, sends them flying across the yard. His strength would have been a source of wonder, and likely a source of trouble. It's a power he doesn't fully understand, and certainly can't fully control. It's raw, untamed, divine energy bubbling up inside him. This isn't the disciplined strength of a trained soldier. It's the chaotic, unpredictable power of a thunderstorm. And it's in this tempestuous youth that we begin to see the seeds of both his heroic destiny and his tragic downfall. His greatest gift is inextricably linked to his greatest weakness. A wild, impulsive heart that acts first and thinks later, if at all. As Samson grows into manhood, this impulsive heart leads him straight into trouble. He goes down to Timnah, a Philistine town. Now, for an Israelite, especially one from the border tribe of Dan, going to Timnah would be like venturing into enemy territory. But Samson isn't there for reconnaissance. He's there because he saw a woman, a Philistine woman, and he wants her. He comes home to his parents, the devout couple who had dedicated him to God before he was even conceived, and makes a demand that must have horrified them. I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. His parents are aghast. Isn't there a woman among our own relatives, or among all our people? They plead. Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? They are thinking about faith, about culture, about the law, about the 40 years of oppression their people have suffered. Marrying a Philistine was not just a personal choice, it was a betrayal. It was fraternizing with the enemy. It was inviting a foreign god into their family. Everything about it was wrong. But Samson is stubborn. His desire overrides all their sensible objections. Get her for me, he insists. She's the right one for me. Or more literally, she is right in my eyes. That phrase echoes the grim summary of the era. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Samson, the man chosen to deliver Israel, is a perfect product of his chaotic times. He is driven by his own sight, his own desires, his own impulses. The narrator, however, gives us a little behind-the-scenes peek. It says that his parents didn't know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. It's a fascinating and complex idea. God is going to use Samson's flaws, his recklessness, his questionable romantic choices, to accomplish a divine purpose. God isn't causing Samson to sin, but he is sovereign enough to weave even the tangled, messy threads of Samson's life into his grand design. So reluctantly, his parents agree. Samson and his parents head down the road to Timnah to make the arrangements. As they approach the vineyards of the town, Samson wanders off from his parents for a moment. Suddenly, a terrifying sound splits the air, the roar of a young lion, powerful and confident, charging straight for him. An unarmed man, even a strong one, would be no match. This should be the end of Samson's story before it even begins. But then something happens. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. It's that stirring he felt as a boy, but now it's a full-blown hurricane. The text says he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. There's a casualness to the description that is breathtaking. He doesn't just fight the lion, he dismantles it. It's a primal, visceral display of supernatural power. And then, just as quickly as it came, the feeling is gone. He stands there, his heart still hammering, the dead lion at his feet, and he doesn't tell a soul, not even his parents. It's his secret, his first taste of what he is truly capable of, and he keeps it to himself. This act of keeping a secret becomes a pattern for Samson. He is a man who lives in isolation, separated from others by the very gift that makes him special. He continues on to Timnah, talks to the woman, and is pleased with her. The marriage arrangements proceed. Sometime later, when he's on his way back to marry her, he passes the same spot where he fought the lion. He turns aside to look at the carcass. In the sun-bleached skeleton, a swarm of bees has made a home, and the carcass is now filled with honeycomb. Life has sprung from death, sweetness from a violent encounter. Samson, ever impulsive, reaches in, scoops out some honey, and eats it as he walks along. He even gives some to his parents, but he doesn't tell them where it came from. Again, the secret. The lion and the honey are his private symbols, a hidden well of confidence. He has a secret strength and a secret sweetness that no one else knows about. The wedding feast arrives. In that culture, these were epic, week-long celebrations. The bride's family provides 30 groomsmen or companions to celebrate with Samson. But these men aren't his friends. They're Philistines. They are there to watch him, perhaps even to intimidate the lone Israelite in their midst. Samson, brimming with the confidence of his secret lion-slaying power, decides to have some fun. He sees them not as companions, but as adversaries in a game of wits. "Let me tell you a riddle," he announces to the 30 men. "If you can solve it during the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't, you will give me the same." It's a high-stakes bet, a challenge thrown down in the heart of the enemy's camp. The Philistines, proud and competitive, accept immediately. So Samson poses his riddle, drawn from his secret experience. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. The men are baffled. They spend the next 3 days whispering, arguing, trying to decipher it. Eater, strong, sweet. It makes no sense. The riddle is impossible to solve without knowing the secret story behind it. It's a classic Samson move, arrogant, personal, and designed to make him feel superior. By the 4th day, their frustration turns to anger, and then to menace. They are not accustomed to being made fools of, especially by an Israelite. They go to Samson's new wife, their own kinswoman, and their words are chilling. "Coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us," they hiss, "or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to steal our property?" Suddenly, the festive atmosphere is poisoned with terror. The young bride is caught in an impossible situation: betray her new husband, or watch her family be murdered. She does what any terrified person would do. She goes to Samson, weeping. "You hate me. You don't really love me," she cries, her tears a weapon of emotional blackmail. "You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my own father or mother," Samson replies, trying to hold firm. "So why should I explain it to you?" But she is relentless. For the rest of the week, for the remaining days of the feast, she weeps and pleads and wears him down. It's the first time we see this pattern emerge. Samson, the man of invincible physical strength, is incredibly vulnerable to emotional pressure from the women he desires. His heart is not as strong as his arms. Finally, on the 7th day, he breaks. He is exhausted, worn down by her constant tears. He tells her the secret, the lion, the honey, and as soon as she has the answer, she runs and tells her people, the 30 Philistine companions. Just before sunset on that final day, the men come to Samson, smug and triumphant. They give him the answer, framing it as a poetic retort to his riddle. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson knows instantly what has happened. He has been betrayed. The sweetness of the honey in his riddle now turns to ash in his mouth. His response is bitter and seething with rage. If you had not plowed with my heifer, he snarls, you would not have solved my riddle. It's a crude and angry insult, comparing his wife to a farm animal put to work by others. The game is over, and his public humiliation is complete. But a debt is a debt. He owes the men 30 sets of fine clothes. And this is where the story takes its first truly dark and violent turn. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him again. But this time, it's not to fight a lion in self-defense. It's a spirit of righteous fury. He goes down to Ashkelon, another major Philistine city, about 23 miles away. He finds 30 men, strikes them down, takes their clothes, and brings the spoils back to the men who had solved the riddle in Timnah. This is a brutal, shocking act. He doesn't just go to a store and buy the clothes. He kills 30 strangers to pay off a gambling debt that was lost through treachery. This is the first major salvo in his one-man war against the Philistines. It's driven by personal rage, but it is also being used for that divine purpose, an occasion to move against the Philistines, burning with fury at his wife's betrayal and the whole sorry affair. Samson storms back to his father's house, abandoning the feast and his new bride. In his absence, her father, perhaps thinking Samson is gone for good and trying to save face, gives her in marriage to the man who had been Samson's best man at the wedding. A little while later, during the wheat harvest, Samson's anger cools. He decides, in his impulsive way, that he wants his wife back. He shows up at her father's house with a young goat as a gift, ready to reconcile. I'm going to my wife's room, he declares, but her father blocks the way. I was so sure you hated her, the man says, stammering and afraid, that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more beautiful? Take her instead. The father's attempt to placate Samson backfires spectacularly. For Samson, this is the ultimate insult. His wife, the subject of all this turmoil, has been given away like a piece of property. The personal wound now reopens into a chasm of rage, but this time he directs it at the entire Philistine nation. This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines, he roars. I will really harm them. What follows is one of the most bizarre and destructive acts of guerrilla warfare in the Bible. Samson goes out and catches 300 foxes. Let's just picture the sheer effort and cunning that would take. Then he ties them together in pairs, tail to tail, and fastens a torch to each pair of tails. He lights the torches and releases the panic-stricken animals into the dry, standing grain of the Philistines. The result is utter devastation. The fire spreads from the grain fields to the vineyards, to the olive groves. The three pillars of the Philistine agricultural economy are turned to smoke and ash. It's a calculated act of economic terrorism, and it's devastatingly effective. When the Philistines demand to know who did this, they're told Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his father-in-law gave his wife to his companion. The Philistines' response is swift and brutal, but strangely misdirected. Instead of going after Samson, the superhuman destroyer of their livelihoods, they go to Timnah, and they carry out the very threat they had made to his wife earlier. They burn her and her father to death. It's a cruel, tragic irony. She betrayed Samson to save her family from being burned, and in the end, that is exactly their fate. When Samson hears about this, his grief and rage combine into a righteous inferno. The woman he once desired, the source of so much pain and betrayal, has been murdered because of his actions. Since you've acted like this, he vows, I swear I won't stop until I get my revenge on you. The cycle of violence escalates. He attacks them viciously, limb and thigh, a phrase that suggests a brutal, no-holds-barred slaughter. After this bloody rampage, Samson needs a place to hide. He withdraws to a cave in a place called the Rock of Edom. He's now a wanted man, an enemy of the state. The Philistine army, thousands strong, mobilizes. They march into the territory of Judah, the tribe Samson's own people belonged to, and they make camp, demanding Samson be turned over. The men of Judah are terrified. They are not warriors, they are subjects. They have lived under Philistine rule for so long, they've forgotten what it means to be free. 3,000 of them go to the Rock of Edom to confront Samson. Their words to him are heartbreaking. They don't see him as a deliverer, they see him as a problem. Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? They ask him. What have you done to us? It's the voice of a beaten people, a people who prefer the familiarity of servitude to the risks of freedom. Samson's reply is weary. I only did to them what they did to me. It's the simple, brutal logic of revenge. We have come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines, they tell him. And here, Samson faces a choice. He could fight his own people. With his strength, he could easily slaughter these 3,000 men. But he doesn't. He shows a restraint here that is surprising. Perhaps he recognizes the fear in their eyes. Perhaps he knows that fighting them would be a pointless tragedy. He agrees to surrender to them, but only if they swear an oath that they will not kill him themselves. They just have to tie him up and hand him over. They agree. They bind him with 2 new ropes, the fibers strong and fresh. They lead him out of the cave, a giant of a man, seemingly helpless, his phenomenal strength constrained by simple rope. As they bring him to the Philistine camp at a place called Lehi, the Philistines see him coming, and they begin to shout in triumph. They have him. Their tormentor, the man who burned their fields and slaughtered their people, is delivered, bound, and helpless, into their hands. This is their moment of victory. But it is short-lived. As the triumphant shouts of the Philistines fill the air, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Samson in power one more time. The two new ropes on his arms become as fragile as charred flax. They snap and fall away from his hands as if they were nothing. He is free, and he is standing in the midst of his enemies, unarmed but filled with divine power. He looks around frantically for a weapon. His eyes fall upon the sun-bleached skeleton of a donkey. He reaches down and picks up its jawbone, not a fresh one, but a dry one, brittle and likely to shatter. It's a ridiculous, pathetic weapon. It's a statement of contempt. He is going to defeat an army with the bone from a dead, unclean animal, and then he wades into them. The story doesn't give us a blow-by-blow account. It just gives us the grim, staggering result. With nothing but a donkey's jawbone in his hand, Samson cuts down 1,000 men. 1,000. It's a scene of almost unimaginable carnage. One man against an army, wielding a piece of bone, leaving a field of bodies in his wake. When the last Philistine has fallen or fled, Samson stands there, panting, surrounded by the silence of the dead. He throws away the jawbone, and in a moment of poetic, boastful triumph, he creates another punning verse. With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. But the exhilaration of victory is immediately replaced by a desperate, crushing need. He is dying of thirst. He has just expended a phenomenal amount of energy, and he is alone in a dry, sun-beaten place. For the first time, in his moment of greatest victory, he seems to feel his own human frailty, and in that desperation, he cries out to the Lord. It's one of the few recorded prayers of his life. You have given your servant this great victory, he cries out. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? It's a raw, honest prayer. It's part complaint, part plea. He acknowledges God as the source of his victory, but he also questions him. Is this it? Is this how it ends? After all that, will he die a pathetic death from dehydration? And God answers. He splits open a hollow place in the ground at Lehi, and water gushes out. Samson drinks, and his strength returns. He names the spring En-Hakkore, which means the caller's spring, a permanent monument to the moment when the warrior, at his most triumphant and most vulnerable, called out to God and was heard. After this, the Bible tells us that Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. It's a quiet 20 years in the narrative. We don't get stories of his battles or his leadership. It seems to be a period of tense stalemate. Samson is a known quantity, a one-man deterrent. The Philistines know what he's capable of, so they keep their distance. Samson, for his part, seems to be a judge in the sense that he is a protector, a symbol of Israel's potential strength. But he doesn't seem to be an administrator or a spiritual leader. He remains a loner, a man defined by his explosive potential. But 20 years is a long time, and over those 20 years, perhaps Samson grew comfortable. Perhaps he began to believe his own legend. The fear and awe he inspired may have insulated him from the consequences of his actions, and his greatest weakness, the one that had already brought him so much grief in Timnah, had not gone away. His impulsive heart was still drawn to forbidden women, and this time it would lead him to the valley of Sorek and to a woman named Delilah. This is where the story shifts from a tale of heroic, if brutal, warfare to an intimate, psychological tragedy. Delilah. Her name has become synonymous with betrayal. The Philistine rulers, the lords who had been humiliated by Samson for 2 decades, see an opportunity. They know they can't beat him in a fair fight. They've tried that, and it ended with 1,000 of their soldiers dead in a field. So they resort to the weapon that has worked before, treachery. They go to Delilah with a proposition. See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. This is an astronomical sum of money, a fortune. For this kind of money, Delilah agrees to become a spy, a honey trap. We don't know much about her relationship with Samson. The text simply says he fell in love with her. But her actions suggest that whatever love he felt was not returned. For Delilah, he is not a lover, he is a mark. So she begins her work. She becomes his confidant, his safe harbor. And then, in a moment of supposed intimacy, she asks the question, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." It's so direct, so blatant, it's almost comical. It's like a cartoon villain asking the hero for his secret weakness. And Samson, for his part, decides to play along. He thinks it's a game, just like the riddle was a game. He's confident, arrogant. He believes he's in control. If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, he tells her, I'll become as weak as any other man. Delilah is all efficiency. She gets the bowstrings from the Philistine lords, who are hiding in the room, waiting. She ties him up while he sleeps, and then she cries out the trigger phrase they've arranged. Samson, the Philistines are upon you. Samson wakes up and snaps the bowstrings as if they were threads touching a flame. The first attempt is a failure. Samson laughs it off. He was just teasing her, but Delilah doesn't laugh. She plays the wounded lover. You have made a fool of me, you lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied. Her persistence is unsettling. A normal person would be terrified, or at least suspicious. But Samson is blinded by his affection for her, or perhaps by his own ego. He thinks he's still playing the game, so he gives her a second fake answer. If they tie me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man. It's almost the same answer he gave the men of Judah, which makes you wonder if he's mocking the whole situation. Delilah gets the new ropes. The Philistine lords are still hiding nearby. She ties him up. Samson, the Philistines are upon you, she cries again. And again, he wakes and snaps the ropes off his arms like they were threads. Game, set, match, Samson. Or so he thinks. Delilah is furious now. Her pouting turns into nagging accusation. You have been making a fool of me and lying to me, she says. Tell me how you can be tied. Her question is always the same, relentless and obsessive. How can you be subdued? Samson, still inexplicably playing along, gives her a third, more elaborate answer. This time, he involves his famous hair. If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, he says, I'll become as weak as any other man. This is getting dangerously close to the truth. He's now bringing the symbol of his vow into the game. He's toying with the sacred. So Delilah weaves his long, heavy braids into her loom while he sleeps. She tightens it, making him literally a part of her domestic machinery. Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He wakes up and pulls the entire loom, pin and all, right out of the floor. The game is becoming more and more destructive, but Samson still refuses to see the danger he is in. He sees a persistent lover, not a deadly enemy, and this is where Delilah unleashes her final, most powerful weapon. It's not ropes or looms, it's her words. The Bible says she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, so that his soul was vexed to death. This is the key. Samson, the man who tore a lion apart, who slaughtered 1,000 men with a jawbone, who ripped a city's gates out of the ground, cannot withstand the daily, grinding pressure of emotional manipulation. The strongest man in the world is being defeated by nagging. He is utterly exhausted. His soul is vexed to death. He has no more fight left in him. He is tired of the game, tired of the secrets, tired of the pressure. And in a moment of catastrophic emotional surrender, he gives in. He told her all his heart. He lays himself bare. No razor has ever been used on my head, he whispers, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. He has given her everything. The secret is out. He has betrayed his vow, his God, and himself, all for a woman who is about to sell him for silver. Delilah knows instantly that this is the truth. There's a finality in his voice, a brokenness she hasn't heard before. She sends a message to the Philistine lords. Come back one more time. He has told me everything. They come, money in hand. She lulls Samson to sleep, his head in her lap, a final, cruel parody of intimacy. She calls in a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. As the razor does its work, as the symbol of his lifelong vow falls silently to the floor, the text says, his strength left him. Then, for the last time, she screams the terrifying words, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He wakes up, still thinking it's the game. I'll go out as before and shake myself free, he thinks. But the narrator adds one of the most tragic lines in all of Scripture. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. He tries to flex his muscles, to call upon that familiar surge of power, and there is nothing. It's gone. The Philistines, who had been hiding in fear, now rush in with confidence. They seize him, and this time there is no escape. The game is over. He is just a man, and they do not just subdue him. They seek to utterly humiliate and destroy him. gouge out his eyes. The man who was so often led astray by what he saw is now condemned to total darkness. They take him down to Gaza, one of the cities whose gates he had once carried away in triumph, and they bind him with bronze shackles. And Samson, the deliverer of Israel, the strongest man who ever lived, is put to work grinding grain in the prison. It's the ultimate degradation, the work of a donkey or a female slave. Round and round he walks in the darkness, pushing the heavy millstone. The sound of the grinding stone is the soundtrack to his new life. Every day is the same: darkness, shackles, endless, monotonous labor. The taunts and jeers of the Philistines are his only company. He has lost his strength, his freedom, his sight, and his God. He has hit the absolute bottom. There can be no lower place for a man like Samson to be. But in that darkness, in that humiliation, something quiet and unnoticed begins to happen. The Bible mentions it in a single, hopeful phrase. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Slowly, day by day, as he grinds the grain, the visible sign of his vow begins to return. And we can only imagine that with the returning of his hair, something else begins to stir within him. Regret, repentance, a slow, painful turning back to the God he had forsaken. In the darkness of his blindness, perhaps for the first time, he truly begins to see. He sees his arrogance, his foolishness, his sin, and he begins to pray, not for water, but for one last chance. The Philistines, meanwhile, are ecstatic. Their great enemy is broken. To celebrate, they decide to throw a massive festival in honor of their god, Dagon. Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, they chant. The temple of Dagon is packed. All the rulers of the Philistines are there. The Bible says there were about 3,000 men and women on the roof alone, watching the festivities. The place is overflowing with drunken, celebrating people. And then someone has an idea. Bring out Samson to entertain us. The crowd roars its approval. What could be better sport than to mock the mighty Samson in his helpless state? They bring him from the prison, this blind, broken giant, and they stand him in the center of the temple, between the two main support pillars. He is their party trick, the final confirmation of their victory, and the victory of their god, Dagon, over the God of Israel. Samson, standing in the noisy, chaotic darkness, says to the young servant who is guiding him, "Position me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so I can lean against them." The boy, unsuspecting, does as he's told, and there, with his hands on the two central pillars that hold up the entire roof, Samson prays his final prayer. It's not a prayer for deliverance. It's not a prayer for escape. It is a prayer for a final, catastrophic act of vengeance that is also an act of sacrifice. "Sovereign Lord," he whispers, "remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." It's still a deeply personal prayer. It's about his eyes, his humiliation. But it's also a prayer of faith. He is asking the God he had abandoned to remember him, to strengthen him just once more. And God hears him. Samson braces himself, one hand on each pillar. He shouts his last words into the din of the party. "Let me die with the Philistines." And then he pushes. With one final titanic surge of divinely restored strength, he bows forward with all his might. There is a terrible, groaning sound of stone grinding against stone. The pillars begin to buckle. Cracks race across the floor. For a moment, a horrified silence falls over the crowd as they realize what is happening. And then the entire roof gives way. The temple collapses inward, a catastrophic avalanche of stone and timber, burying Samson and every single person inside. In his death, Samson killed more of his enemies than he had in his entire tumultuous life. It was his ultimate last stand, not a defiant battle against an army in an open field, but a suicidal act of destruction in the heart of the enemy's temple. He couldn't save himself, so he chose to die on his own terms, taking his captors with him and fulfilling, in one final explosive act, the mission he had been given before he was even born: to begin the deliverance of Israel. His family came and took his body from the rubble and buried him in the tomb of his father, Manoah. His story is a tragedy, a story of colossal wasted potential, of a man whose passions were as great as his strength, and whose flaws were as profound as his calling. He was a terrible leader, a poor role model, and a disastrous romantic. But he was also a man who, in the end, in the depths of his blindness and despair, reached out to God one last time. And God, in his mysterious grace, answered. Samson's final sacrifice was not pretty. It was not clean. But it was a devastating blow to the Philistines, a thunderous announcement that the God of Israel was not to be mocked. And it stands forever as a sobering, awe-inspiring testament to what can happen when a broken man, in his last moments, gives everything he has left. Samson's story is a lonely one, isn't it? It's the story of a singular, blazing sun, a force of nature acting alone, whose power was deeply and tragically personal. His last stand was a solitary act of self-immolation, a final, desperate prayer from a man who had lived his life fundamentally disconnected from his own people. His strength isolated him, his passions drove him, and in the end, he died as he had lived, alone. It's a powerful and sobering tale, but it's only one kind of heroism. Now our journey takes us forward in time, past the chaotic era of the judges, to a period when Israel has a king. But the land is still not at peace. The old enemy, the Philistines, are still a persistent, menacing threat. They are a thorn in the side of the nation, a constant reminder that survival is a daily struggle. And at the heart of this struggle is a new leader, a man whose story is woven not in isolation, but in the thick of brotherhood, loyalty, and shared struggle. His name is David. We're not talking about David the boy with the slingshot, or David the magnificent king on a golden throne in Jerusalem. We're going to a much rougher, more desperate time in his life. This is David the fugitive, David the outlaw, the anointed but not yet crowned king, hunted by the current king, Saul, who has been consumed by a dark and jealous madness. David is on the run, living in the wilderness, sleeping in caves, his life in constant peril. He is a king with no kingdom, a leader with no army, a man with nothing but a promise from God and the clothes on his back. His story and the stories of the men around him begin in a place of desperation called the Cave of Adullam. Picture it, a network of limestone caves in the Judean foothills. It's not a palace. It's damp, dark, and smells of wet earth and bats. The entrance is a shadow on a rock face, easily missed if you do know where to look. It is a place to hide, a place to disappear. And it is here that David, the lonely fugitive, becomes a leader of men. The Bible tells us who came to him in that cave. It wasn't the noble, the wealthy, or the powerful. No, the guest list for David's government in exile was a little different. It says, all those who were in distress, or in debt, or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. Let's think about that for a moment. This wasn't a recruitment drive. It was a collection of broken pieces. These were the cast-offs of Saul's kingdom. The farmer who had a bad harvest and lost his ancestral land to a predatory lender, now a man with nothing to lose. The soldier who had fallen out of favor with the unstable king, his reputation ruined, his career over. The young man seething with a sense of injustice, who saw the corruption and hypocrisy of the powerful and couldn't stomach it any longer. The distressed, the indebted, the discontented. This was a band of misfits, a ragtag collection of about 400 men, each with his own story of failure, grief, or anger. They were a raw nerve of societal pain, gathered in the dark belly of the earth. You can imagine the atmosphere in that cave at first. The suspicion, the tension. Men from different tribes, different backgrounds, thrown together by shared misery. They weren't a team. They were a crowd of individuals united only by the fact that they had nowhere else to go. And at their center was David. What did they see in him? He was a fugitive just like them, but he was different. They had heard the stories, of course. The giant slayer, the brilliant military commander who had won victory after victory for Saul before the king's jealousy had turned toxic. They had heard his music, the psalms that could soothe a troubled mind. But now, in the flickering torchlight of the cave, they saw something more. They saw a man who, despite his circumstances, carried himself with a quiet authority. He didn't just command them, he listened to their stories. He shared their meager rations. He slept on the hard stone floor beside them. He understood their pain because he was living it too. Crucially, David had something they had all lost, a sense of purpose. He was not just running from Saul, he was running towards a future God had promised him. His faith was not a fragile, fair-weather thing. It was a rugged, wilderness-tested conviction. He talked to God as if God were right there in the cave with them, a source of strength and guidance in the darkness. For these broken men who felt abandoned by everyone, this was like a drink of cool water in a desert. David gave them more than just safety from their creditors or from Saul's soldiers. He gave them a reason to fight. He gave them a new identity. They were no longer just the distressed, the indebted, the discontented. They were David's men, and that began to means something in the crucible of that cave, and in the years of hiding and fighting that followed. David forged this band of misfits into one of the most elite fighting forces the ancient world had ever seen. They became known as his mighty men, the Gibborim. They were warriors of legendary prowess, their names whispered with awe by their enemies and with pride by their own people. The bonds formed in those desperate days were stronger than steel. They were a brotherhood, forged in shared danger and unwavering loyalty to the man who had given them a second chance. The Bible, in the books of Samuel and Chronicles, gives us a glimpse into their world by listing some of these men and recounting a few of their incredible feats. It reads like a military honor roll, a testament to a kind of courage that borders on the supernatural. And it's in these brief, almost poetic accounts that we find some of the most breathtaking last stands imaginable. These aren't the lonely, self-destructive acts of a Samson. These are the defiant stands of men fighting for their brothers, for their king, and for the future of their nation. The list is topped by a group known simply as the Three. These were the best of the best, the inner circle of warriors whose deeds were so extraordinary they were set apart from all the others. The first of these was a man named Josheb-Basshebeth, a Tachamonite. The text about him is short, but staggering. It says he raised his spear against 800 men, whom he killed in one encounter. 800 men. Let that number sink in. This isn't a duel. It's not a skirmish. It's a battle. An entire battalion. The description is so sparse, it invites our imagination to fill in the gaps. Where was this? Why was he alone? Was he defending a narrow pass, holding back the enemy while his comrades retreated? Was he the tip of the spear in a desperate charge, a whirlwind of death that broke the enemy's line and their spirit? We can imagine the scene, the dust, the screams, the chaos of close quarters combat, the sheer physical impossibility of it. A spear is a powerful weapon, but it requires strength, stamina, and space. To kill one man with a spear is hard work. To kill 10 is the stuff of legend. To kill 100 would be considered a myth. 800, it defies logic. It suggests a man who entered a kind of battle trance, a state of pure, focused ferocity where fear and exhaustion ceased to exist. It suggests a strength that was not entirely his own. This wasn't just a soldier doing his duty. This was a man becoming a living extension of God's will on the battlefield, a force of divine judgment against the enemies of his king. His is a quiet story in the text, a single, thunderous sentence that tells of a last stand so successful. He was the only one left, but it's the second of the three, who gives us perhaps the most vivid and inspiring image of a last stand in the entire Old Testament. His name was Eleazar, son of Dodai the Ahohite. The story takes place at a location called Padammon, which means boundary of blood. The name itself tells you this was a place of constant conflict. The Philistines had gathered there for battle. The Israelite army under David arrayed themselves for the fight. And at the center of the dispute was something incredibly mundane and profoundly important. A field of barley. It wasn't a fortress. It wasn't a holy site. It was a farmer's field, ripe for harvest. But in a world where life was a constant struggle for subsistence, a field of barley was life itself. It was the bread for the coming winter. It was the food for the women and children back in the villages. To lose the barley field was to face starvation. The Philistines wanted to take it, not just for the food, but for the demoralizing effect it would have. It was a way of saying, "We control your life, your food, your future." The battle was joined, and it did not go well for Israel. The Philistine force was overwhelming. We don't know the details, but we can picture the scene. The clash of shields, the bite of iron, the terrifying sight of the enemy pouring over the rise, more numerous than expected. Fear is a contagious thing on a battlefield. A single soldier turning to run can become a dozen, and a dozen can become 100, until the entire line breaks and it becomes a rout. And that's what happened. The Bible says, "The men of Israel retreated from them. The army broke." The soldiers, sworn to protect their land, dropped their weapons and ran for their lives. It was a moment of national shame and imminent disaster. The barley field and the future it represented was about to be lost. But one man did not run. Eleazar, son of Dodai. He stood his ground. In the middle of that field, with the green stalks of barley brushing against his legs, he watched his brothers in arms disappear over the hill. Can you imagine the feeling, the utter isolation, the roar of the approaching Philistines, the instinct, the screaming voice in your head telling you to run, to save yourself? Why stay? The battle is lost. It's a fool's errand. One man against an army. It's suicide. We don't know what Eleazar was thinking in that moment. Perhaps he thought of David. Perhaps he thought of the oath he had sworn, the bond of loyalty forged in the cave of Adullam. Perhaps he looked at that barley, the simple, life-giving grain, and felt a surge of righteous anger that the enemy would dare to take it. Perhaps it was a simple, profound faith that God had placed him there for a reason. Whatever the cause, he made a choice. He would not retreat. This field was his line in the sand. This was where he would make his stand. So he stood there, alone among the barley, and the Philistines came for him. They would have laughed, seeing a single soldier waiting for them. Arrogant, foolish, they would have sent a few men forward to dispatch him quickly. And Eleazar would have met them, his shield up, his sword a blur of motion. Those first few would have fallen, then a few more. Their laughter would have died in their throats, replaced by shock, then anger. They would have swarmed him, a wave of men trying to overwhelm this single, immovable rock. And Eleazar fought. He was no Samson, a man of innate supernatural strength. He was a trained warrior, a master of his craft, but he was still just a man. He would have felt the strain in his shoulders, the burning in his lungs. His shield would have been splintered, his armor dented. He would have been bleeding from a dozen small cuts, but he did not fall. The Bible describes what happened next with a simple, breathtaking image. He stood his ground and struck down the Philistines till his hand grew tired and froze to the sword. His his hand froze to the sword. This is not just a poetic flourish. It's a physiological description of what happens under extreme, prolonged exertion. His muscles, clenched around the hilt of his sword for so long, in such a life-or-death grip, had cramped and locked into place. The sword was no longer a tool he was holding. It had become a part of him, an extension of his arm, an extension of his will. He could not have dropped it even if he had wanted to. His own body had fused him to his weapon. He fought until he physically could not open his hand. He fought until the line between the man and the sword had vanished. And he fought until there was no one left to fight. The Philistines, seeing their comrades fall one after another before this single, unyielding warrior, finally broke and fled. The man who refused to retreat had caused an entire army to rout, and only then, when the silence of victory settled over the bloody barley field, did his own people return. The Israelite soldiers who had fled crept back, perhaps in shame, to see the aftermath. They found Eleazar standing alone amidst the bodies of the fallen, his hand locked onto his sword. The battle was over. The barley was safe. The text concludes, "And the Lord brought about a great victory that day." It was Eleazar who fought, but it was God who gave the victory. Eleazar's part was simply to stand his ground when everyone else ran. His heroism was an act of faith expressed through sheer, unyielding stubbornness. It's such a powerful picture of commitment. To hold on to what you are fighting for so tightly, for so long, that you become fused to it, that your very body refuses to let go. After the battle, they would have had to pry his fingers, one by one, from the hilt of that sword. It's a quiet, profound testament to a man who, in a moment of crisis, chose to become the unshakable defender of something as simple and vital as a field of grain. The third of the three gives us a story so similar. It feels like a harmonic echo of Eleazar's. His name was Shammah, son of Agi the Hararite. Again, the Philistines are gathered for battle. And again, the prize is a humble plot of land. This time, it's a field of lentils, tiny, protein-rich pulses, peasant food, the stuff of daily survival. And just like before, the Israelite troops are terrified, and they flee. But Shammah, like Eleazar, refuses to run. The Bible says, he took his stand in the middle of the field. That phrase is so deliberate. He didn't defend the edge. He didn't fight a retreat. He went to the absolute center, the heart of the thing he was protecting, and made it his fortress. He drew his line right there, surrounded on all sides by the very thing he was determined to save. From that spot, he defended it. He struck down the Philistines who came to plunder the field. The story is shorter than Eleazar's, but the spirit is identical. It's the same quiet, resolute courage. It's the heroism of the mundane. These aren't grand battles for a kingdom's capital. These are desperate, gritty fights for the next meal. Shammah's last stand ensures that a village won't starve, that families will have stew for the winter. And again, the story ends with the same triumphant refrain. And the Lord brought about a great victory. These These stories of the three, Josheb-Basshebeth, Eleazar, and Shammah, paint a picture of a new kind of Israelite hero. They are not lone wolves driven by personal vengeance like Samson. They are men under authority, loyal to a king, fighting for their people. Their incredible feats are not credited to their own power alone, but are explicitly attributed to the Lord. And their heroism is grounded in the defense of their land, their food, their community. They show us that sometimes the most heroic thing a person can do is simply to stand their ground when every instinct is screaming at them to run. But the stories of the mighty men are not all about last stands on the battlefield. There's another, equally powerful story about the three that reveals the source of this incredible courage. It's a story not of sacrifice in battle, but of a sacrifice born out of pure love and loyalty for their leader. The setting is familiar. David is back in his old haunt, the stronghold of Adullam. It's harvest time. The war is still dragging on. A Philistine garrison is stationed in a particularly painful place, Bethlehem. Bethlehem was David's hometown. It was the place of his childhood, the fields where he had tended his father's sheep, the place where the prophet Samuel had first anointed him as the future king. And now it was occupied territory. The enemy was living in his home, walking his streets, drinking from his well. One day, worn out from the heat and the weariness of the long fight, David is overcome with a wave of nostalgic longing. He sighs, perhaps to himself, not intending it as an order. It's the wistful, weary thought of a homesick man. "Oh," he says, "that someone would get me a drink of water from the well near the gate of Bethlehem." He's remembering that specific well, the taste of its cool, fresh water, the taste of home, the taste of a time before all this fighting, before he was a king on the run. It's a moment of vulnerability, a glimpse into the heart of the warrior poet. Three of his mightiest men overhear this quiet, heartfelt sigh. We aren't told if it was the same three as before, but they were certainly of that elite class. They look at each other. Their king, the man they would follow to the ends of the earth, has a desire. For them, a desire from David is as good as a command. They don't weigh the risks. They don't ask for clarification. They just act. What they do next is insane. They decide to go and get him his drink. This is not a simple trip to the corner store. This means breaking through the Philistine lines. The enemy army is camped in the valley of Rephaim, right between Adullam and Bethlehem. And Bethlehem itself has a garrison. They have to sneak through an enemy army, infiltrate an occupied town, get to a specific well, which is right by the main gate where the guards would be thickest, draw water, and then fight their way back out, all while carrying a skin full of sloshing water. The odds of success are slim. The odds of survival are even slimmer. But they go. The Bible doesn't describe the mission in detail, but we can fill it in. The stealthy journey under the cover of darkness, the silent takedown of sentries, the heart-pounding tension as they slip through the streets of Bethlehem, shadows in the moonlight, the hurried, breathless moment at the well, one man drawing the water, while the other two stand guard, their swords ready. And then the explosive, violent fight to break back out through the enemy lines, protecting their precious cargo. Somehow, miraculously, they make it back. They appear before David, bruised, bleeding, covered in the dust of their journey, and they present him with the water. Here, my king, the water you longed for. David is stunned. He looks at the water, and then he looks at his men. He sees their condition, and he understands instantly what they have done. He understands the mortal peril they placed themselves in, just to satisfy a fleeting, nostalgic wish he had spoken aloud. And he is utterly broken by it. The love and loyalty that would inspire such a crazy, reckless act is overwhelming, and he realizes he cannot drink the water. This water is no longer just water. It has been consecrated by the courage of his men. To drink, it would be to treat their sacrifice lightly. Far be it from me, Lord, to do this, he cries out. He holds up the water skin and declares, "Is it not the blood of men who went at the risk of their lives?" He sees it for what it is, their lifeblood offered freely to him. And something that precious, that sacred, cannot be used to quench a common thirst. It can only be given to God. So David takes the water from the well of his hometown, the water he had longed for, and he pours it out on the ground as a drink offering to the Lord. It is one of an incredibly profound moments in David's life. In that single act, he honors his men in the deepest way possible. He tells them without words, "Your loyalty to me is a holy thing. Your life is more precious to me than my own comfort." He refuses to let their sacrifice serve him. Instead, he elevates their sacrifice into an act of worship. Can you imagine how those three men felt in that moment? They had risked their lives for a drink of water, and their king had turned their gift into a sacrament. That act would have bound them to him forever. It explains everything. It explains why an Eleazar would stand his ground in a field of barley. It explains why a Shammah would defend a patch of lentils. They fought for a king who valued their lives more than his own desires. They fought for a leader who saw their blood as something sacred. This is the key difference between the age of Samson and the age of David. Samson's power was for himself. His vengeance was personal. He inspired fear, but not loyalty. David's power was for his people, and it was rooted in a covenant of mutual love and respect with his men. Samson stood alone and died alone. David's men stood their ground for him, and in return, he honored their sacrifice as a holy offering to God. The heroism of the mighty men is a different kind of strength. It's the strength of brotherhood. It's the strength that comes from knowing the person standing next to you will not run. It's the strength that comes from fighting for a leader who is worthy of your loyalty. Their last stands were not just about defiance, they were about devotion. They held the line in the bloody fields of barley and lentils, because their king had first held them in his heart as something precious and holy, worth more than even the coolest, sweetest water from home. Their stories remind us that the greatest sacrifices are rarely made for a cause or a country in the abstract, but for the person right there beside you, and for the leader who has proven he is worth dying for. The fields of barley and lentils, defended by the fierce loyalty of David's mighty men, show us a heroism born of brotherhood. It's a powerful, intimate courage, a bond between a soldier and his king, between a man and his brother in arms. But what happens when the threat isn't just a raiding party trying to steal a harvest, but an entire empire trying to steal your soul? What happens when the last stand required isn't for a field, but for your faith itself? For this story, we must journey forward in time, into the silent centuries that separate the last prophets of the Old Testament from the coming of the New. The world has changed. The Babylonian and Persian empires are dust. A brilliant young Greek conqueror named Alexander the Great has blazed across the known world. And though he is long dead, the cultural fire he lit continues to burn. His empire was shattered into pieces, and the land of Judea is now caught between two of its warring successor kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. For a time, things were relatively peaceful, but now control has shifted to the Seleucids, and a new king sits on the throne in Antioch. His name is Antiochus IV, and he has given himself a grandiose title, Epiphanes, which means God manifest. It tells you everything you need to know about his ego. Antiochus has a problem. His empire is a sprawling, diverse patchwork of different peoples, different cultures, and different gods. It's difficult to manage, and he believes he has the solution: a unified, universal culture. And the culture he wants to impose on everyone is Hellenism, the sophisticated, alluring way of life of the Greeks. Hellenism was more than just speaking Greek. It was a complete worldview. It was about philosophy and logic, about art and theater that celebrated the human form, about politics and civic life. And it was about the gymnasium. Now, for us, a gymnasium is just a place to exercise. But for the Greeks, it was the central educational institution for young men. It was where they trained their bodies, yes, but also their minds. It was the heart of their culture. But for a devout Jew, the gymnasium was a place of profound spiritual danger. It involved exercising in the nude, which violated Jewish standards of modesty. It promoted a focus on the perfection of the body over the sanctification of the spirit. And its patrons were often required to offer sacrifices to Greek gods like Hermes or Heracles. For some Jews, especially the wealthy and aristocratic in Jerusalem, Hellenism was attractive. It was the culture of the sophisticated, the powerful, the modern. They began to adopt Greek customs, change their names to sound more Greek, and even sought out painful surgeries to reverse their circumcision so they could fit in at the gymnasium. A deep, painful rift was forming within the Jewish people, a culture war between those who wanted to assimilate and those who wanted to remain faithful to the covenant of their ancestors. Into this tense situation steps Antiochus Epiphanes, a man with all the subtlety of a charging bull. He sees the Jewish faith not as an ancient and venerable tradition, but as a stubborn, backward obstacle to his grand project of cultural unity. He decides that Judaism must be eradicated, so he issues a series of decrees that are breathtaking in their cruelty and sacrilege. The observance of the Sabbath was forbidden, punishable by death. The possession of a copy of the Torah, the Holy Scriptures, was a capital crime. The sacred rite of circumcision, the very sign of the covenant God made with Abraham, was outlawed. Stories from this time tell of mothers who, in defiance of the decree, circumcised their newborn sons, only to be executed with their bobbies tied around their necks. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a campaign of cultural genocide. The final, unforgivable blow came in the year 167 BC. Antiochus marched his army into Jerusalem and went straight to the heart of the Jewish faith, the Holy Temple. He plundered its treasures, the golden altar, the menorah, the sacred vessels. And then he committed an act of such profound blasphemy that it would be remembered forever as the abomination of desolation. He erected an altar to the Greek god Zeus in the temple courtyard, and upon that altar he sacrificed a pig. To understand the horror of this, you have to understand the Jewish soul. The temple was the one place on earth where God's presence was said to dwell. It was the center of their spiritual universe, and the pig was, for them, the ultimate symbol of all that was unclean. To sacrifice a pig on an altar to a pagan god in the holy temple was to commit the most profound act of spiritual defilement imaginable. It was a declaration that the God of Israel was defeated, that the covenant was broken, that everything they held sacred was now profane. For the faithful Jews of Judea, it was the darkest day in their history. The light of the nation had been extinguished. Hope, it seemed, was dead, but the spirit of a people and the spirit of their God is not so easily snuffed out. The rebellion didn't start in the great city of Jerusalem, where the Hellenized priests and aristocrats were collaborating with the enemy. It started in a small, dusty, insignificant town called Modin in the foothills of Judea. And it was started not by a great general or a young firebrand, but by an old priest. His name was Mattathias. He was of the Hasmonean family, a man of respected priestly lineage, and a father of 5 grown sons: John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan. He had watched the creeping influence of Hellenism and the brutal decrees of Antiochus with a heart full of grief and righteous anger. One day, the king's officers arrived in Modin to enforce the royal decree. They set up a pagan altar in the town square and gathered the villagers. The lead officer approached Mattathias as a respected elder and tried to persuade him to be the first to offer the pagan sacrifice. He used honeyed words, promising him honor, wealth, and the king's friendship. "Come, be the first to obey the king's command," he urged. "All the other nations have, even the people here in Judea and Jerusalem." The entire town was watching. This was the moment of choice. Compliance meant safety, comfort, and the king's favor. Defiance meant, well, No one knew for sure, but it couldn't be good. All eyes were on the old priest. Mattathias stood tall, and his voice, though aged, boomed across the square with unshakable conviction. Even if all the nations that live under the king's rule obey him, and have chosen to do his commandments, departing every one from the religion of his fathers, he declared, yet I and my sons and my brethren will walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words, to go from our religion, either on the right hand or on the left. It was a stunning public act of defiance, a declaration of spiritual independence. As he finished speaking, however, another Jew from the village, perhaps a man terrified for his family, or one who saw an opportunity for advancement, stepped forward to the altar to offer the forbidden sacrifice. He was going to comply. For Mattathias, this was the final straw. It wasn't just the pagan officer demanding sacrilege. It was one of his own people, willingly defiling himself and his community. A holy zeal, the same kind of righteous anger that had moved Phinehas in the days of Moses, consumed him. He rushed forward, and in one swift motion, he killed the apostate Jew upon the altar. Then, his fury turning to the source of the blasphemy, he killed the king's officer and tore down the pagan altar. The die was cast. There was no going back. Standing over the bodies, the blood still fresh on his hands, Mattathias cried out with a loud voice that would echo through history, "Let everyone who is zealous for the law and who stands by the covenant follow me." This was his last stand. Not a stand with a sword against an army, but a stand for the covenant against compromise. He had chosen God over security, faith over life. He grabbed his 5 sons, left everything they owned behind, and fled into the rugged, trackless wilderness of the Gophna Hills. Just as David had fled from Saul centuries before, Mattathias and his family now became fugitives for the sake of God. In the wilderness, a movement began to form. Others who were zealous for the law, who had refused to bow to the king, heard of Mattathias's stand and began to seek them out. These were the Hasidim, the pious ones. They were not soldiers, they were farmers and scribes and priests, but they were united by a fierce determination to preserve their faith. This small, ragtag band, hiding in caves and living off the land, became the nucleus of the rebellion. For about a year, they waged a guerrilla campaign of spiritual restoration. They would sweep down into villages, tear down the pagan altars, punish collaborators, and circumcise the male children who had been left uncircumcised out of fear. They were a force of purification, a holy insurgency fighting not for territory, but for the Torah. But Mattathias was an old man, and the hard life of a fugitive took its toll. As he lay dying, he gathered his 5 sons around him and gave them his final charge. He knew his sons' strengths. Simon, he said, was a man of counsel, wise and steady. He should be their father figure, their political advisor. But for the military command, for the actual fighting, he looked to his 3rd son, Judas. Judas Maccabeus, he said, has been a mighty warrior from his youth. He shall be your captain and shall fight the battle of the people. Judas, his nickname Maccabeus, is thought to mean the hammer. It was a perfect name for the man who would now lead the fight. He was fierce, relentless, a brilliant military tactician, and he was filled with a burning, unshakable faith that God was on their side. After his father's death, the hammer fell upon the Seleucid forces with a fury they could never have anticipated. Judas understood their situation perfectly. His small band of rebels, armed with little more than farm implements and captured weapons, could not possibly face the professional, heavily armed Seleucid army in a conventional, pitched battle. To do so would be suicide. So, he became a master of unconventional warfare. He used his intimate knowledge of the Judean hills, the narrow passes, the hidden valleys, the rocky terrain to his advantage. He would strike at night, ambush enemy columns, disrupt their supply lines, and then melt back into the wilderness before they could mount an effective counterattack. His first major test came against a man named Apollonius, the governor of Samaria, who marched south with a large force to crush the rebellion. Judas met him in a narrow ascent, negating the advantage of the Seleucid numbers. In the ensuing battle, Judas and his men fought with a holy ferocity. Judas himself fought his way to Apollonius, struck him down, and took his sword. For the rest of his life, Judas would fight with the sword of the first enemy general he had ever defeated. News of this victory spread, and more recruits flocked to his banner. The rebellion was growing. The next to challenge him was Saron, a commander of the Syrian army, who came with an even larger force, boasting that he would make a name for himself by crushing this Jewish upstart. He met Judas at the pass of Beit Horon, the same place where Joshua had fought a famous battle centuries before. Judas's men were weary and hungry, and seeing the size of the enemy army, their courage began to fail. How can we, being so few, fight against so great a multitude and so strong? They asked. Judas's reply was a sermon on the battlefield. It is no hard matter for many to be shut up in the hands of a few, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. And with heaven, it is all one to deliver with a great multitude or a small company. For the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of an host, but strength cometh from heaven. Inspired by his faith, his men attacked. They charged down the pass, catching the Syrians by surprise. Saron's army was routed, and the fear of Judas and his brothers began to spread throughout the region. The hammer had struck twice, and the empire was beginning to feel the blows. King Antiochus, now back in his capital, was enraged. He had dismissed this as a minor provincial disturbance, but it was now a full-blown insurrection. He dispatched a massive expeditionary force to Judea, 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry, under the command of 3 of his top generals, Ptolemy, Nicanor, and Gorgias. Their orders were simple: to utterly destroy the Jewish rebels, sell their families into slavery, and repopulate the land with foreigners. An army of slave traders followed the Seleucid force, ready to purchase the human spoils of a victory they believed was certain. Judas and his army, now numbering around 6,000, gathered at Mizpah, a traditional place of prayer and assembly for Israel. From there, they could see the holy city of Jerusalem, its temple still defiled. The sight filled them with sorrow. They fasted, put on sackcloth and ashes, and spread out a copy of the Torah that had been desecrated with pagan drawings. They cried out to God, "What shall we do with these, and whither shall we carry them away? For thy sanctuary is trodden down and profaned." The odds were impossible. 47,000 against 6,000. It was a recipe for annihilation. Judas knew that a direct confrontation was out of the question. He needed a miracle and a brilliant plan. He discovered through his scouts that the General Gorgias was planning to take 5,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 cavalry on a secret night march to attack the Jewish camp by surprise. Judas saw his chance. Instead of waiting to be attacked, he would attack first. He ordered his own camp to be lit with bonfires, as if they were all still there. And then, under the cover of darkness, he led 3,000 of his best men on a forced march of his own. Gorgias arrived at the Jewish camp to find it empty. The fires were burning, but the men were gone. He assumed they had fled in terror into the mountains, and he set off in pursuit. Meanwhile, Judas and his 3,000 men were marching in the opposite direction, toward the main Seleucid camp at Emmaus, which was now depleted of its best troops and its most aggressive commander. At dawn, Judas and his small force stood on the hills overlooking the enemy camp. His men were exhausted and outnumbered, even with the depleted numbers. But Judas gave them one final, stirring speech. "Fear ye not their multitude, neither be ye afraid of their assault," he cried. "Remember how our fathers were delivered in the Red Sea, when Pharaoh pursued them with an army. Now therefore let us cry unto heaven, and he will have mercy upon us." Then he blew the trumpets, and his tiny army charged down the hill and smashed into the unsuspecting Seleucid camp. The enemy was caught completely by surprise. Panic erupted. Soldiers, half-dressed and still waking from sleep, were cut down before they could even reach their weapons. The camp was overrun, and the Seleucid army broke into a full-blown, chaotic retreat. Judas, showing incredible discipline, forbade his men from taking any plunder. The fight wasn't over. He knew Gorgias and his elite force would be returning soon. He had the captured camp set on fire. Gorgias and his men, weary from chasing shadows all night in the mountains, saw the smoke rising from their camp and knew instantly what had happened. They had been outmaneuvered, tricked. When they returned, they saw Judas's small, disciplined army arrayed for battle, and their own camp in flames behind them. Their morale shattered. Without even engaging, they dropped their weapons and fled. It was a victory of staggering proportions, a masterpiece of tactics and faith. The plunder from the Seleucid camp was immense, enough to arm and supply their own army for a long time to come. The slave traders who had come to buy Jewish slaves were now, in a supreme irony, rounded up and sold into slavery themselves. The hammer had defeated an army more than 10 times his size, and the road to Jerusalem was now open. A year later, Judas and his men marched into the holy city, but their triumphant return was met with a heartbreaking sight. The temple was in ruins. Weeds grew in the sacred courts. The gates were burned. And there, in the center of it all, stood the pagan altar, the abomination of desolation. The hardened warriors, men who had faced down armies without flinching, broke down and wept. Their grief soon turned to resolve. They set about the holy work of cleansing and restoring the sanctuary. They tore down the defiled altar and built a new one with uncut stones, as the law required. They crafted new holy vessels, a new menorah, a new table for the showbread. The entire temple was scrubbed, purified, and made holy once more. When it was time to relight the golden menorah, the lampstand that was to burn continually before the Lord, they faced a problem. According to tradition, the oil for the menorah had to be specially prepared and sealed by the high priest to ensure its purity. In the ruins of the temple, they could find only one small jar of oil that still bore the unbroken seal. It was only enough to last for a single day. It would take 8 days to prepare a new supply of ritually pure oil. They faced a choice. Should they wait? Or should they light the lamp with what they had, trusting in God? They chose faith. They lit the menorah. And then, a miracle. The single day's supply of oil burned for 8 full days, until the new, pure oil was ready. It was a sign, a quiet, gentle miracle in the midst of a brutal war. A sign that God was pleased with their work, that his light had not been extinguished, that hope had returned to his people. On the 25th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, they rededicated the temple to the Lord with songs and harps and joyful celebration. This festival of rededication, which they celebrated for 8 days, would become the annual festival we know today as Hanukkah, the festival of lights. The goal of their last stand was achieved. They had not just won battles, they had reclaimed their spiritual home. But the war was far from over. The Seleucid Empire was vast and powerful, and it would not give up a province so easily. The fighting continued, year after year, and the cost was high. In one great battle, Judas's younger brother, Eleazar, saw a massive war elephant decorated with royal armor. Believing King Antiochus himself must be riding it, Eleazar performed an act of unbelievable, suicidal bravery. He charged through the enemy lines, got directly underneath the colossal beast, and thrust his spear up into its belly. He killed the elephant, but in its death throes, it collapsed on top of him, crushing him to death. His was a heroic, tragic last stand for the cause, a single, selfless act of sacrifice in the hope of ending the war by killing the king. Even the hammer himself, Judas Maccabeus, was not invincible. Years later, facing a new and massive Seleucid army, Judas found his own forces had dwindled to a mere 800 men. His advisors begged him to retreat, to flee, and fight another day. But Judas refused. His response was the creed of a true warrior who had given his entire life to this fight. Far be it from me to do such a thing as to flee from them, he declared. If our time has come, let us die bravely for our kindred, and leave no stain upon our glory. He led his 800 men in a desperate charge against the enemy's strongest wing. Incredibly, they broke through, but it was a hollow victory. The rest of the Seleucid army enveloped them from the rear. Judas, the hammer of God, was surrounded and killed. His own last stand was not a tale of miraculous victory, but of a brave commander choosing to die with his men rather than face the shame of retreat. The rebellion did not die with Judas. His brothers, first Jonathan and then Simon, took up the leadership, continuing the struggle through a combination of warfare and shrewd diplomacy. Eventually, amazingly, they succeeded. Simon, the last of the 5 brothers, finally established an independent Jewish kingdom, the first in over 400 years. The story of the Maccabees is the story of a last stand on a national scale. It began with the defiant cry of one old priest in a forgotten town. It was carried on the shoulders of his 5 remarkable sons and the thousands of ordinary people who chose to fight for their covenant. They were outmanned, outgunned, and at times on the verge of annihilation. But they were driven by a faith that victory comes not from the multitude of an army, but from heaven. Their long, bloody, and ultimately triumphant struggle for freedom ensured that the Jewish faith and people would not be wiped from the face of the earth. They were a hammer, guided by the hand of God, that shattered the spear of an empire, and in cleansing their temple, they lit a light that has never gone out. The story of the Maccabees is a story written in fire and blood, a last stand for the very survival of a faith and a people. It was a fight for the Torah, the holy law, and for the temple, the holy place. Judas and his brothers fought and died to reclaim and rededicate that sacred space, to light the menorah and declare to the world that the God of Israel was still present with his people. Their heroism was in their willingness to pick up the sword to defend the sacred. Our story takes a sharp turn. We move forward another century and a half. The Greek Seleucids are gone, replaced by the iron fist of a new empire, Rome. Judea is a restive province, and Jerusalem is once again a city of simmering tensions. The temple, reclaimed and rebuilt, stands magnificent, the center of Jewish life and worship. The Sanhedrin, the great council of elders and scribes, holds authority over the religious life of the people. The law of Moses is studied, debated, and revered. On the surface, it seems the Maccabees were successful. The institutions they fought to save have survived, but a new conflict is brewing. And this time, the battle lines are drawn not between the Jewish people and a foreign empire, but within the heart of Judaism itself. A new movement has begun, centered around a rabbi from Nazareth named Jesus, who was recently executed by the Romans at the behest of the religious leaders. His followers, however, claim that he has risen from the dead, that he is the long-awaited Messiah, and that he is the true fulfillment of the law and the temple. This new faith is spreading like wildfire through the streets of Jerusalem. And the very same authorities who guard the sanctity of the temple now see this way as the greatest threat they have ever faced. The last stand we are about to witness is not one of sword and shield, but of wisdom and words. Our hero is not a mighty general, but a humble servant. His battlefield is not a mountain pass, but a courtroom. And his final, defiant act is not a charge into the enemy, but a sermon that will cost him his life. His name is Stephen. We first meet Stephen not in a synagogue or a battlefield, but in the middle of an administrative squabble in the early church. The community of believers in Jerusalem was growing at an explosive rate. In their initial zeal and love, they were practicing a radical form of communal living, sharing all their possessions. A daily distribution of food was established to care for the widows, who were among the most vulnerable members of society. But a problem arose. There was a cultural divide in the early church between the Hebraic Jews, who were native to Judea and spoke Aramaic, and the Hellenistic Jews, who were from other parts of the Roman Empire, spoke Greek, and were often seen as being a bit more worldly. The complaint arose that the Hellenistic widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution. It's such a human problem, isn't it? A new movement filled with divine purpose and miraculous power still has to deal with the logistics of making sure everyone gets a fair share of lunch. The 12 apostles, realizing they were getting bogged down in administrative work when they needed to be focused on prayer and preaching the gospel, came up with a wise solution. It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word of God in order to wait on tables, they announced. Brothers and sisters, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will turn this responsibility over to them. The proposal was a success, and the community chose 7 men. The first name on that list, the man who was clearly the leader among them, was Stephen, described as a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit. Along with the other 6, he was brought before the apostles, who prayed and laid their hands on them. This was the birth of the office of deacon, a ministry of service born out of a practical need. But Stephen was more than just a gifted administrator. The grace of God was so powerful in his life that it couldn't be contained to just serving tables. The book of Acts tells us he was a man full of God's grace and power, and he began to perform great wonders and signs among the people. He was not one of the original 12 apostles, but the same power that worked through them was clearly at work in him. And he was a brilliant and compelling speaker. He began to preach and teach about Jesus with a wisdom and clarity that was startling. His success inevitably attracted opposition. His ministry seemed to be particularly focused within the Greek-speaking Jewish community, and he found himself in debates with members of a place called the Synagogue of the Freedmen. This was a synagogue for Jews who had come to Jerusalem from various parts of the diaspora, Cyrene and Alexandria in North Africa, and Cilicia and Asia in what is now Turkey. These were cosmopolitan, educated men, and they were fiercely proud of their traditions. They entered into a debate with Stephen. ready to dismantle his arguments about this Nazarene Messiah. But they couldn't. The text says they could not stand up against the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. Imagine their frustration. They, the learned men from the great centers of Hellenistic thought, were being intellectually and spiritually outmaneuvered by this deacon, this food server. He wasn't just quoting scripture. He was articulating a vision of God's work in history that they could not refute. His words had a power, a divine energy that their own learning could not match. And so, like so many before them who have lost an argument, they resorted to slander and violence. Since they couldn't defeat his ideas, they decided to destroy the man. They secretly persuaded some men to tell lies about him. We have heard Stephen speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God, these false witnesses claimed. The charge was calculated and venomous. To speak against Moses and God was the most serious crime imaginable. They stirred up the people, the elders, and the teachers of the law. A mob formed, and they seized Stephen and brought him before the Sanhedrin, the high council. Picture the scene: the hall of hewn stones. 71 of the most powerful and learned men in Judea, seated in a semicircle. The high priest, Caiaphas perhaps, presiding from the center. This was the same court that had condemned Jesus just a short time before. It was a place of immense power and intimidation. And into this lion's den walks Stephen, a lone defendant, accused of the ultimate crimes against his faith and his people. The false witnesses were brought forward to make their official, perjured testimony. They twisted his teachings into a terrifying accusation. This fellow never stops speaking against this holy place and against the law they charged. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs Moses handed down to us. This accusation was spiritual dynamite. The two pillars of Jewish identity in the Second Temple period were the Temple and the Torah, the law of Moses. The Maccabees had fought and died for them. To suggest that either could be destroyed or changed was not just heresy. It was treason against the entire nation. They were accusing Stephen of being an enemy of God and an enemy of the people. This was a death sentence. The high priest turned to Stephen, the full weight of the court's authority in his voice. "Are these charges true?" he asked, all eyes in the hall fixed on the defendant. Every member of the council, from the most cynical elder to the most zealous scribe, leaned forward to hear his defense. And at that moment, something extraordinary happened. The Bible gives us this stunning detail. All who were sitting in the Sanhedrin looked intently at Stephen, and they saw that his face was like the face of an angel. What does that mean? It means that in this moment of supreme peril, when any normal person would be trembling with fear, Stephen was filled with a supernatural calm. His face was not contorted with anger or pale with terror. It was radiant. It shone with a peace that was not of this world, with a light that seemed to come from another place. Before he even opened his mouth, his very countenance was a testimony. His appearance declared his innocence and the divine presence that was with him. And then began to speak. But what came out was not a short, legalistic defense. It was not a plea for his life. Instead, Stephen launched into one of the longest, most comprehensive, and most daring sermons in the entire Bible. He didn't just defend himself, he put the entire history of Israel on trial. His last stand would be a retelling of their own sacred story, but in a way that would systematically dismantle the very foundations of their accusations against him. He was accused of speaking against the temple and the law. His response was to show them that they had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of both. He begins respectfully, "Brothers and fathers, listen to me." And he takes them all the way back to the beginning, to Abraham. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, Stephen says. His very first point is a subtle but powerful one. Where did their story begin? Not in the Holy Land, not in Jerusalem, not in the temple. It began in a foreign, pagan land, with God appearing to a man out of nowhere. God's promise, the very foundation of their existence as a people, was given outside the sacred geography they held so dear. God, Stephen is arguing, is not confined to a place. He is a God who calls people out of places. He promised Abraham the land, yes, but Stephen points out that during his life, Abraham was given no inheritance here, not even enough ground to set his foot on. The promise was for the future. The faith came first, before the land was ever possessed. From Abraham, he moves to the patriarchs, and specifically to Joseph. And here, he introduces the central, recurring theme of his sermon, the rejection of God's chosen deliverer by his own people. The patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, Stephen says, and they sold him as a slave into Egypt. The very founders of the 12 tribes, their revered ancestors, tried to murder, and then sold into slavery the very man God had chosen to save them. It was a stunning indictment, but Stephen continues, God was with him. And where did God rescue and exalt Joseph? Not in the promised land, but in Egypt. Joseph became the ruler of a foreign nation, and it was from that position, outside the Holy Land, that he saved his family from famine. Once again, God's salvation came in an unexpected place, through a man his own brothers had rejected. The pattern is being established. Now Stephen arrives at the great figure who looms over all of Jewish history, Moses. And he dedicates the largest part of his sermon to him. He is accused of speaking against Moses, so he will show the council that it is they and their ancestors who have a long history of rejecting Moses. He recounts Moses' birth and his miraculous rescue, his upbringing in the court of Pharaoh again. Note the theme. Israel's great deliverer was educated not in a Hebrew school, but in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. When Moses was 40, Stephen says, he decided to visit his own people. He saw an Israelite being mistreated by an Egyptian, and he killed the Egyptian to defend him. Moses thought that his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, Stephen explains. But they did not. The very next day, Moses tries to intervene in a fight between two Hebrews, and he is met with a snarling rejection. Who made you ruler and judge over us? One of them asks. This is the heart of it. God had chosen Moses to be their ruler and judge, but his own people refused to see it. They threw his offer of deliverance back in his face. And what was the result? Moses had to flee for his life. He became an exile in the land of Midian for 40 years. The first attempt at salvation by God's chosen deliverer was thwarted by the rejection of the people he came to save. The parallel to Jesus, whom the Sanhedrin had recently rejected, would have been hanging, unspoken, but deafeningly loud, in the air of that courtroom. Where does God finally commission Moses for his great work? Not in Jerusalem, not in a holy building. After 40 years had passed, Stephen continues. An angel appeared to Moses in the flames of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. God speaks to him from the fire and declares, "The place where you are standing is holy ground." It is God's presence, Stephen is arguing, that makes a place holy. A piece of desert wilderness becomes a sanctuary because God is there. This is a direct challenge to the council's temple-centric theology. They believed God's presence was confined to their building in Jerusalem. Stephen is reminding them that their own history proves God's holiness is wild, untamed, and cannot be contained. And then Stephen drives his point home with a devastating rhetorical blow. This is the same Moses they had rejected with the words, "Who made you ruler and judge?" He was sent to be their ruler and deliverer by God himself. He repeats their words of rejection, turning them into an indictment. The one you cast out, he is saying, is the very one God sent to save you. He quickly recounts the Exodus, the 40 years of wonders and signs in the wilderness. But even then, in the very presence of God's miraculous provision, the people's hearts were not with him. Our ancestors refused to obey him, Stephen says. Instead, they rejected him, and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. And he points to the ultimate act of apostasy, the incident of the golden calf. While Moses was on the mountain, receiving the living words of the law from God, the people down below were already breaking the very first commandments, building an idol and demanding, "Make us gods who will go before us." They rejected God's living prophet, Moses, and they rejected the living words he brought them. And instead, they chose a dead, golden idol. This, Stephen thunders, is your history. This is who you have always been. You are a people who resist the deliverers God sends you. He mentions the tabernacle, the tent of the covenant law, that their ancestors had in the wilderness. He emphasizes its divine design, made according to the pattern God had shown Moses. And he emphasizes its portability. It was a tent. It moved with them. God was not fixed to one location. He journeyed with his people. This tent was eventually brought into the promised land under Joshua. It was David who first desired to build a permanent dwelling place for God. And now Stephen is arriving at the heart of his accuser's charge, his blasphemy against the temple. He acknowledges that it was Solomon who built the temple. He doesn't deny its historical reality, but he immediately qualifies it with a powerful theological statement that strikes at the very root of their pride. However, he says, his voice likely rising in intensity. The Most High does not live in houses made by human hands. To prove his point, he doesn't use his own authority. He uses the authority of their own most revered prophet, Isaiah. He quotes from the scroll of Isaiah, and every man in that council would have known the words by heart. Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord, or where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all these things? The argument is complete. The logic is inescapable. He has used their own sacred history and their own sacred prophets to show that their obsession with a sacred place has blinded them to the God who is Lord of all places. They have taken Solomon's beautiful temple, a mere footstool for God, and they have effectively turned it into an idol, believing they can control and contain the creator of the heavens and the earth within its walls. They have loved the house more than the God who was meant to inhabit it. After this long, patient, brilliant, and devastating historical argument, Stephen's tone shifts. The history lesson is over. The time for indictment has come. He looks out at the 71 faces staring at him, faces of men who held his life in their hands, and he unleashes a torrent of prophetic accusation. He is no longer a defendant. He is now the prosecutor, and they are the ones in the dock. You stiff-necked people, he cries, using the same language God used to describe the Israelites at the golden calf. Your hearts and ears are still uncircumcised. This was a profound insult. They were physically circumcised. It was the mark of their covenant identity. But Stephen accuses them of being spiritual Gentiles, their hearts and ears closed to the things of God. You are just like your ancestors. You always resist the Holy Spirit. He connects them directly to the entire sorry history he has just recounted. You are not the faithful remnant, he declares. You are the culmination of all the rebellion, all the rejection, all the idolatry. Was there ever a prophet your ancestors did not persecute? He demands. The question hangs in the air, its own answer. They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. He is speaking of Isaiah, of Jeremiah, of all the prophets who were martyred for speaking God's truth. And then he delivers the final, crushing blow. And now you have betrayed and murdered him. The unspoken parallel is now spoken. The pattern of rejection is now complete. Their ancestors killed the prophets who predicted the Messiah. You, he says to the members of the Sanhedrin, you have done one better. You have murdered the Messiah himself, you who have received the law that was given through angels, but have not obeyed it. He has answered their charge. They accused him of speaking against the law. He accuses them of being the true lawbreakers. The members of the Sanhedrin were, the Bible says, furious and gnashed their teeth at him. His words were like daggers to their hearts. They could not refute his logic, so they were consumed by rage. He had held up a mirror to them, and they could not stand the reflection. In this moment of ultimate earthly peril, with the hatred of 71 powerful men directed at him like a physical force, Stephen receives a final gift of grace. text says, "But Stephen, full of the Holy Spirit, looked up to heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. The veil between heaven and earth is pulled back for him. He sees the true reality, the true court where the true judgment is made. And he sees Jesus, not sitting as he is often described, but standing. It's a posture of advocacy, of welcome. It's as if the Son of Man is standing up to honor his faithful witness, to receive him into glory. And Stephen describes what he sees. "Look," he says, his angelic face now truly alight with the vision of heaven. "I see heaven open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God." For the Sanhedrin, this was the final, unforgivable blasphemy. They had condemned Jesus for claiming a unique relationship with God. Now, his follower was claiming to see this executed criminal in the position of ultimate honor and authority in the universe. They could listen no more. They covered their ears, shouting at the top of their voices. All semblance of a legal trial vanished. It became a lynch mob. They rushed at him, dragged him out of the courtroom, and pushed him through the city streets to a place outside the city gate. The method of execution for a blasphemer was stoning. The witnesses, who were required by law to cast the first stones, took off their outer robes so their arms would be free. And they laid their cloaks at the feet of a young, zealous Pharisee who was supervising the execution, giving it his full, fervent approval. His name was Saul of Tarsus. As the stones began to fly, as the brutal, jagged rocks struck his body, Stephen did not curse his executioners. He did not cry out in pain or anger. His last stand was one of unshakable faith and unbelievable grace. He prayed, his voice clear above the roar of the mob. "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." It was a prayer of perfect trust, committing his soul into the hands of the Savior he had just seen in glory. Then he fell to his knees, and with his last breath, he cried out one final prayer, a prayer not for himself, but for them. "Lord," he shouted, "do not hold this sin against them." It was a perfect echo of Jesus' own words from the cross. "Father, forgive them." It was the ultimate testimony. In the very act of being murdered, he embodied the grace and forgiveness that his Messiah had taught. And with that prayer on his lips, he died. Stephen's last stand was over. He had not won his court case. He had not saved his life. By any earthly measure, he had lost. But his was not a battle for earthly victory. His weapon was the truth of Scripture. His courage came from the Holy Spirit. His stand was one of unflinching testimony in the face of lethal hatred. And his final act of forgiveness, aimed at the very men who were killing him, was the most powerful testimony of all. And there, at the edge of the scene, stood the young man Saul, holding the coats, nodding his approval. He had heard the whole sermon. He had seen the angelic face. He had watched the grace-filled death. And though he was, in that moment, a persecutor and a murderer, a seed had been planted. The blood of the first martyr of the church would water the ground from which the greatest apostle would one day spring. Stephen's stand was not an ending. His death was a beginning, a testament to a new kind of power, a new kind of victory, one found not in killing your enemies, but in dying for them. Stephen's final prayer, a plea for forgiveness for the very men who were crushing the life out of him, was not his own invention. He was echoing a prayer he had heard, modeling his own last stand after the one who had made the ultimate stand for him. As Stephen looked up and saw the Son of Man standing to receive him, he was looking at the source, the blueprint, the very definition of sacrificial love. His martyrdom, as heroic as it was but a reflection of a much greater fire. And so now, for our final story, we must turn our gaze from the reflection to the fire itself. We must go to the final hours of Jesus of Nazareth and witness the last stand that redefined the meaning of sacrifice, heroism, and victory forever. We've seen a last stand of personal vengeance in Samson, a last stand of loyal brotherhood with David's men, a last stand of national and religious survival with the Maccabees, and a last stand of unflinching testimony in Stephen. But this last stand is against a different kind of enemy. It's not against the Philistines or the Seleucids or even the Sanhedrin. It is a stand against the vast, cosmic forces of sin and death itself, and it will be won not with a jawbone or a sword or a sermon, but with an act of complete and total surrender. Our story begins in an upper room in Jerusalem. The city is bustling, filled with pilgrims who have come for the Passover, the great festival celebrating Israel's deliverance from slavery in Egypt. Jesus and his 12 disciples have gathered in a borrowed room to share this sacred meal together. The air in the room is thick with unspoken things. There is the warmth of camaraderie, the comfort of ancient rituals, but underneath it all, there is a current of deep, sorrowful tension that only Jesus truly understands. He knows this is his last supper. For his disciples, it is just another Passover. For him, it is the end of one story and the beginning of a new one. As the meal begins, he does something that shocks them to the core. He gets up from the table, takes off his outer clothing, wraps a towel around his waist, and pours water into a basin. Then he begins to wash their feet. We have to understand what this meant. Washing the feet of guests was the job of the lowest servant, the household slave. The roads were dusty and dirty, and this was a basic but menial act of hospitality. For their master, their rabbi, their Lord, to kneel before them and perform this task was unthinkable. It was a reversal of the entire social and spiritual order. When he comes to Simon Peter, the ever-impulsive, ever-passionate disciple, Peter objects. "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" he asks, his voice filled with incredulous horror. It's a violation of everything he believes is right. Jesus' reply is gentle, but mysterious. "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." But Peter cannot accept it. "No," he declares, "you shall never wash my feet." It comes from a place of respect, but it is a misguided respect. He is trying to honor Jesus by keeping him in his proper place on a pedestal. But Jesus' mission is not to stay on a pedestal. His entire purpose is to descend, to serve, to humble himself. Unless I wash you, Jesus tells him, you have no part with me. Suddenly, Peter understands that this is not about dirty feet. It is a spiritual act, a symbol of a cleansing that only Jesus can perform. And in typical Peter fashion, he swings from one extreme to the other. Then, Lord, he exclaims, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus calms him, explaining that one who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. He is teaching them a profound lesson in humility, a lesson that will be the foundation of the kingdom he is building. I have set you an example, he tells them, that you should do as I have done for you. The path to greatness in his kingdom is the path downward, the path of the servant. This single act is the overture to the entire symphony of his sacrifice. As they recline at the table again, the atmosphere shifts. The quiet tension becomes a palpable sorrow. Very truly, I tell you, Jesus says, his voice heavy, one of you is going to betray me. The words drop like a stone into the quiet room. A flurry of confusion and distress erupts. The disciples look at each other, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Who could it be? It's unthinkable. They begin to ask him, one by one, their voices filled with anxious denial. Surely you don't mean me, Lord. They are a brotherhood, a family. They have left everything to follow him. The idea that a traitor is in their midst is a poison that contaminates the entire sacred meal. Judas Iscariot, the one who kept the money bag, the one whose heart had already been turned by greed and disillusionment, is there. He has already made his deal with the chief priests, 30 pieces of silver to betray his master. Jesus knows. He dips a piece of bread and gives it to Judas, a final, quiet gesture of intimacy, even in the face of betrayal. What you are about to do, Jesus says to him, do quickly. The other disciples don't understand. They think Jesus is sending him on an errand. And Judas gets up and slips out of the room. The Gospel of John adds a chilling detail. And it was night. Judas leaves the light of the world and walks out into the darkness. With the betrayer gone, Jesus takes the bread, the symbol of the Passover, and he gives it a new and eternal meaning. He gives thanks, breaks it, and gives it to them. This is my body, he says, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Then he takes the cup of wine. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. He is telling them that the ancient story of deliverance, of the Passover lamb whose blood saved the people from death, is now about to be fulfilled in him. He is the true Passover lamb. His body will be broken. His blood will be shed, not just to save one nation from slavery, but to save all of humanity from the bondage of sin and death. This is his last will and testament, given to his dearest friends before he goes to his death. After singing a hymn, they leave the upper room and make their way out of the city across the Kidron Valley to a place Jesus often went with his disciples, a a garden of olive trees on the Mount of Olives called Gethsemane. The name means oil press. It was a place where olives were crushed to bring forth valuable oil. And in this garden, Jesus himself is about to be crushed by a weight of sorrow so immense it is almost impossible to comprehend. This garden is the place of his true last stand. The battles to come in the courtyards and on the cross are the physical aftermath. The real war is fought here in the darkness under the gnarled branches of the ancient olive trees. He takes Peter, James, and John, his inner circle, deeper into the garden with him. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he tells them, his voice raw with anguish. Stay here and keep watch with me. He goes a little farther, about a stone's throw away, and he falls on his face on the ground, and he prays. This is the most honest, most agonizing prayer in the Bible. This is the Son of God in his full humanity, staring into the abyss of what awaits him. My Father, he cries out, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. What is this cup? It's not just the physical suffering of the cross, as horrific as that will be. In the Old Testament, the cup is often a symbol of God's wrath, the righteous judgment against sin. Jesus, the sinless one, is about to take upon himself the full weight of all the sin of all humanity, all the cruelty, the greed, the lust, the hatred, the rebellion. And he is about to drink the cup of God's judgment that we deserve. He is about to willingly endure a spiritual separation from his Father that he has never known in all of eternity. And the prospect of it is tearing him apart. But his prayer does not end there. Yet, he says, his voice a testament to a trust that transcends the agony. Not as I will, but as you will. This is the hinge of human history. This is the moment of ultimate surrender. He has the power to call legions of angels. He has the power to simply walk away. But he chooses obedience. He chooses his Father's will. He chooses us. The Gospel of Luke tells us that his anguish was so intense that his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. This is a rare medical condition known as hematidrosis, where extreme stress and agony can cause capillaries in the sweat glands to rupture. This is not a metaphor. This is the physical manifestation of the war being waged within his soul. He is fighting for us, and the fight is costing him everything. He rises and goes back to his 3 friends, needing their companionship, their support, and he finds them asleep. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asks, his voice a mixture of sadness and gentle rebuke. His loneliness is absolute. No human being can enter into this struggle with him. He must face it alone. Twice more he goes away and prays the same prayer. Twice more he returns to find his friends asleep. The battle is fought, and it is won. The decision is made. His will is perfectly aligned with his Father's will. When he returns the 3rd time, his voice is different. There is a new resolve. Are you still sleeping and resting? He asks. Look, the hour has come. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Into the quiet quiet darkness of the garden comes the flickering light of torches. A detachment of temple guards and Roman soldiers arrives, armed with swords and clubs, and at their head is Judas. He has been given a sign to identify Jesus to the guards. He walks up to his master. "Greetings, Rabbi," he says, and he kisses him. A kiss, the sign of friendship and affection, is twisted into the ultimate act of betrayal. Jesus' response is not one of anger, but of heartbreaking sorrow. "Friend," he says, "do what you came for." The guards move forward to arrest him. When they say they are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus speaks two simple words: "I am." In the Greek, it is ego eimi, the same phrase God used to identify himself to Moses at the burning bush. And in that moment, a flicker of his divine power is unleashed. The armed soldiers and guards draw back and fall to the ground. This is a crucial detail. He is not a helpless victim being captured. He is the sovereign Lord in complete command of the situation, willingly giving himself over. He is demonstrating that no one takes his life from him. He lays it down of his own accord. Peter, ever the man of action, draws his sword and in a clumsy act of violence slices off the ear of the high priest's servant. Jesus immediately stops him. "Put your sword back in its place," he commands. He reaches out and touches the servant's ear and heals him. Even in the moment of his own betrayal and arrest, his instinct is to heal, not to harm. His kingdom is not of this world. It will not be advanced by the sword. "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" he asks Peter. The decision made in the garden will now be seen through to the end. And at this, all his disciples, his closest friends who had promised to die with him, desert him and flee into the night. He is utterly alone. What follows is a series of sham trials, a perversion of justice conducted in the dead of night. They take him first to Annas, the former high priest, and then to Caiaphas, the current high priest, where the Sanhedrin has gathered. They bring in a parade of false witnesses, but their stories are so contradictory they cannot make a charge stick. Throughout it all, Jesus remains silent, a picture of dignified endurance in the face of their lies. Finally, the high priest, exasperated, puts him under oath. "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." The moment for silence is over. The moment for testimony has come. Jesus looks his accuser in the eye and gives his own last stand of testimony. "You have said so," he replies, "but I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." He is claiming not only to be the Messiah, but to be the divine Son of Man from the prophet Daniel's vision, the one who shares God's throne and authority. For the high priest, this is the final, definitive proof. He tears his robes and declares, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? You have now heard the blasphemy. What is your verdict?" The council's judgment is swift and unanimous. He is worthy of death. While this is happening, another drama is unfolding in the courtyard outside. Peter, who had followed at a distance, is warming himself by a fire. 3 times he is recognized as one of Jesus' followers. And 3 times, terrified for his own life, he denies it, finally calling down curses on himself and swearing, "I don't know the man." And immediately, a rooster crows. At that moment, Jesus is being led across the courtyard, and his eyes meet Peter's. It is a look not of condemnation, but of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. And Peter, remembering Jesus' prediction, goes outside and weeps bitterly. The rock on which Jesus was to build his church has crumbled into dust, because the Sanhedrin did not have the authority under Roman law to carry out a death sentence. They take Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, at dawn. They change the charge to Pilate. Blasphemy is a meaningless Jewish squabble. So they accuse Jesus of treason, claiming to be a king, forbidding the people to pay taxes to Caesar. Pilate, a cynical and pragmatic Roman politician, can see through their charade. He questions Jesus. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asks. Jesus' reply is otherworldly. "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest. But now my kingdom is from another place." Pilate is intrigued and unnerved. "I find no basis for a charge against this man," he declares. Trying to rid himself of the problem, he sends Jesus to Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee, who happens to be in Jerusalem. Herod is thrilled. He hopes to see Jesus perform a miracle. But Jesus says nothing to him. He stands in absolute silence before the petty, mocking king. Frustrated, Herod and his soldiers ridicule him, dress him in an elegant robe, and send him back to Pilate. Pilate tries one last time to release him. It is the custom at Passover for the governor to release one prisoner to the crowd. He offers them a choice. Jesus, the gentle healer whom Pilate knows is innocent, or Barabbas, a man in prison for insurrection and murder. The chief priests stir up the crowd, and a chilling chant begins to rise from the people. "Give us Barabbas." Pilate is aghast. "What shall I do, then, with the one you call the King of the Jews?" he asks. The reply comes back as a roar. "Crucify him." Pilate, seeing that a riot is about to erupt and fearing for his career, makes a final, cowardly gesture. He takes a basin of water and washes his hands before the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he declares. "It is your responsibility." Then he releases Barabbas and hands Jesus over to be flogged and crucified. The Roman scourging was a horrific torture, designed to inflict maximum pain and blood loss. After this, the soldiers engage in a cruel game. They press a crown woven from long, sharp thorns onto his head. They put a staff in his hand for a scepter, and a purple robe on his bleeding back for a royal cloak. They kneel before him in mock homage, spitting on him and striking him on the head with the staff. "Hail, King of the Jews," they sneer. Then they lead him away to be crucified. He is forced to carry the heavy wooden crossbeam through the crowded streets toward a place outside the city wall called Golgotha, the place of the skull. Already weakened from a sleepless night of interrogation, the agony of Gethsemane, and the blood loss from the scourging, he stumbles and falls. The soldiers, impatient, grab a man from the crowd, a pilgrim from Cyrene named Simon and compel him to carry the cross for Jesus. They arrive at Golgotha. They offer him wine mixed with myrrh, a mild anesthetic, but he refuses it. He will face what is to come with a clear mind. They lay him down on the cross, stretch out his arms, and drive the thick iron nails through his wrists and his feet. Then they raise the cross and drop it into its hole, a jarring, agonizing motion. And there he hangs, between two common criminals, the King of Kings, the Lord of Glory, executed in the most shameful and excruciating manner known to the ancient world. But this is not a scene of defeat. It is his throne of victory. And from this throne, he speaks his final words, a testament to the purpose of his suffering. He looks down at the soldiers gambling for his clothes, at the crowd jeering, at the leaders mocking him, and he prays, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." His first act on the cross is to extend grace to his own murderers. One of the criminals being crucified with him joins in the mocking. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other criminal rebukes him. "We are punished justly," he says, "but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he turns his head toward Jesus. "Jesus," he says, in a moment of stunning, simple faith, "remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus gives him a promise that echoes through eternity. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." He looks down and sees his mother Mary, her heart being pierced by a sword of grief, just as had been prophesied. Standing with her is John, the beloved disciple. Even in his agony, he provides for her. "Woman, here is your son," he says to Mary, and to John, "Here is your mother." He creates a new family, a family of faith, from the wreckage of the cross. Then, from noon until 3 in the afternoon, a supernatural darkness covers the land. The sun is blotted out. And in that darkness, Jesus cries out with a loud voice, quoting the first line of Psalm 22, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This is the cry from the heart of the cup. This is the moment of ultimate spiritual agony, as the sinless Son of God bears the full weight of the sin of the world and endures the separation from his Father that sin causes. This is the deepest, darkest mystery of the cross. After this, knowing that the end is near, he says, "I am thirsty." It is a cry of profound human suffering, a reminder that the Son of God is also truly the Son of Man. A sponge soaked in cheap wine vinegar is lifted to his lips. He tastes the wine, and then he speaks his great cry of triumph. A single word in the original Greek, tetelestai, "It is finished." It is not a cry of resignation, but of accomplishment. The work is done. The debt is paid. The new covenant is sealed. The victory is won. Finally, with his last breath, he commits his spirit back into his Father's care. "Father," he cries, "into your hands I commit my spirit." And bowing his head, he gives up his spirit. He dies. And at that moment, the earth shakes. Rocks split. And in the temple, the massive, thick curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, the symbolic dwelling place of God, from the rest of the temple, is torn in two, from top to bottom. The barrier between a holy God and sinful humanity is ripped apart. The way is now open for all. The Roman centurion, a hardened professional soldier standing guard at the foot of the cross, sees the earthquake and all that has happened. He is overcome with awe. Surely, he says, this man was the Son of God. This was the ultimate last stand. It was a stand that looked like the most pathetic defeat in human history. But it was, in fact, the greatest victory ever won. Samson died, bringing a temple down on his enemies. Jesus died, so the temple curtain could be torn open for his enemies to become his family. David's men risked their lives to bring their king a drink of water. This king poured out his own life like water to bring his people the gift of eternal life. Stephen died asking forgiveness for his murderers, a lesson he learned from his master, who died doing the same. The cross was not a tragedy, it was a triumph. It was not an accident, it was an appointment. It was the moment when God, in the person of Jesus Christ, absorbed all the darkness, violence, sin, and death of the world into himself, and in doing so, defeated it forever. It is the ultimate sacrifice, the final and perfect last stand, that stands not as an ending, but as the quiet, earth-shaking, curtain-tearing beginning of a brand new creation.